And I'm going to close this door, but I'm going to record it. So we'll have it for later if someone can't make it or something like that. So how are y'all doing today?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Can't complain. You know me, but I don't think you know me. My name's Floyd. I'm one of the assistant chiefs with Jessamine County EMS. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Cameron Hall. I'm from Pulaski County 911. Got about 2 years experience dispatching.
Nice. And what about you? Do you have experience dispatching?
Yeah, I've done it off and on for the past 8 years.
Cool. Have you been to the academy?
Mm-hmm.
Have you? Cool. So y'all don't have to go through that again, do you?
No.
Nice.
Thankfully.
Well, why are we talking about telephone CPR if you've already been through the academy? Well, for a number of reasons. One is telephone CPR is a skill like any other skill, and if you don't use it and you don't train on it, then you start to not be good at it. It's like taking a shower. If you don't take a shower every day, then you start to stink, and you can stink at performing or providing telephone CPR. But also, we're a Resuscitation Academy Lighthouse, which means that the Seattle Resuscitation Academy has vetted us and determined that we are doing the things that they say you should do to save more people from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, and that we're doing it fairly well. One of those big things is telephone CPR. Now, when I first started working at Jessamine County EMS, I came to Dano and Megan and I said, hey, tell me about our telephone CPR program. And they said, we have a protocol for it and we do it, we provide it. And I said, all right. I said, can I listen? Do you mind if I start listening to the tapes? So we started listening to the recordings. And for 1 year of data that we reviewed, we never actually instructed a person on putting hands on the chest and getting to CPR. So we started doing a deep dive into that and trying to figure out why that was occurring. And then we started having training, and Dano was in the training, and it was really cool because he spoke up and he said, I'm just going to be honest, Floyd, we weren't taught how to recognize it correctly. And number two, we thought that if we did CPR on someone and they didn't need it, that we could hurt them, and we thought we could get in trouble. When the opposite is true, you're more likely to get in trouble for not providing telephone CPR instructions when they need it than you are in providing it if they don't need it. So it is far better to provide those instructions than to not. But also, the Academy actually reached out to the Resuscitation Academy recently asking if they had a telephone CPR train the trainer. So the Resuscitation Academy reached out to me and said, do you know if this exists? I said, no. I said, we do our own internal training. And they said, do you want to work with us to create a train the trainer for telephone CPR? I'm like, absolutely. So hopefully soon we'll be developing a telephone CPR train the trainer program where we go out and train others how to train others on telephone CPR. But this is going to be a quick crash course on it. This PowerPoint was designed by CPR Lifelinks, which is a wonderful resource for this kind of is train the trainer material that they created, although the RA may create something different. But this is a pretty good program that they put together, and the resources that I've given you are common barriers that you will encounter when trying to provide telephone CPR instructions and how to overcome those barriers. So we'll get started. This is a canned PowerPoint that they've created, and we'll talk about some specifics here that we might do differently. So why does this matter? That number is probably over 300,000 out of hospital cardiac arrests now. We know nationally the survival rate for someone suffering a sudden cardiac arrest is around 10%. 10%. Now it's much higher than that in Jessamine County, and I attribute the success and and how many people we save each year to, namely, the telecommunicators. They play probably the most pivotal role in saving someone from out of hospital cardiac arrest than we do, because you are there shortly after time zero. So from the time someone collapses to when they make that call, you are with them. You are providing instructions to them on what to do. That matters because a person's chance of surviving goes down 10% for each minute that goes by without CPR. All right. So how long do you think from the time that person collapses from a cardiac arrest to when you receive the call, you process it, you dispatch us, to when we go en route, to when we get on scene? How long do you think that's going to take?
Average,
Yeah.
probably, well, we talking about you all?
We're talking about from the time they collapse, from the time they collapse to when we get on scene. Just throw out a number. Doesn't have to be very scientific.
12.
That's probably close. You think about our response time is around 8 minutes, depending on where it's at. And so if the chance of surviving goes down by 10% for each minute, and we get there at 8 minutes, what's their chance of surviving?
20%.
20%, which is really low. However, the chance of surviving, or the rate at which their chances of surviving goes down, can decrease by one simple intervention, and that's by CPR being performed before we get there. So imagine if the person collapses, it takes them a minute to process what's going on and to decide to get their phone and dial 911, and then a few seconds for y'all to answer the call. And you, let's say at the 2-minute mark, which is a good goal, within 60 seconds of you receiving that call, asking your initial questions to determining it's a cardiac arrest. If you start pre-arrival, start CPR instructions within the first 2 minutes of receiving that call, and giving them 1 minute to decide that they need to call 911. So let's say at 3 minutes total, now their chance of surviving is 70%. Okay, so those are pretty good chances. Now it's still going to take us 8 minutes to get there, but instead of it decreasing by 10% per minute, maybe now it's 5%. Okay, so you're buying us time to get there. This is why it matters so much. We talk a whole lot about teaching people how to perform CPR, hands-only CPR training here and there, and let's train everybody in the world. But the reality of the matter is, we could train 10,000 people, or let's say 1,000. We could train 1,000 people to save one life. Let's say we train 1,000 people in the community to save one person by performing CPR. Those 1,000 people, out of those 1,000, one person may actually save somebody. We could train one dispatcher telephone CPR really well, and they could save dozens of people. You see what I'm saying? So we get more fruit from our efforts if we focus on telephone CPR. And I do believe that you all are an integral part of the system of care. And I think hopefully by now, based on just the introduction that I provided, that you think that as well. So you guys can just by CPR being performed before we get there, you can double or triple a person's chance of surviving. Conversely, if the person calls 911 and they would have started CPR, but the dispatcher asks inappropriate questions like, well, are their eyes open? Which doesn't matter. Are they breathing? Which they can breathe agonally. If you ask these questions, do they have a pulse? Don't ask them that. Doesn't matter. If you ask these questions and you're like, if they could have a pulse, we don't want them to start CPR. You could cause harm. Don't do that. and that person actually needs CPR, but you've just deterred them from providing that, you could cause harm in doing so. It is far better to provide CPR instructions than to not. So, how does CPR work? There's a lot of misconceptions on how CPR works, but yes, it circulates blood through the brain and through the heart and other vital organs in the body. But it doesn't generally save someone from a cardiac arrest itself. You keep the brain and the other organs perfused with essential nutrients and oxygen and blood, and you perfuse those organs until someone can get there and put on an AED or a monitor and shock the heart, which could restore it to a perfusing rhythm. So you're sustaining their organs until someone can get there with an AED or a monitor. And I said this, bystander CPR can double or triple the chance of surviving. So what is telecommunicator CPR? Since you all have experience as dispatchers, I won't belabor this or try to insult you with this, but basically you receive the call. All right, there's a multi-pronged approach to telephone CPR. One, you receive the call and you have to identify that that person is indeed in cardiac arrest, which is probably the most difficult decision you're going to make. Once you've decided that, then the steps of providing those instructions are not that difficult. That's not generally the part, based on my experience and listen to, at this point, hundreds of telephone CPR cases. That's not the difficult part. The difficult part is in determining whether or not that person is in cardiac arrest. And then obviously providing those instructions, but often we stop there. You start the telephone CPR instructions, but then what happens? Like, what do you do from there? All right, we've got them doing CPR.
Continue CPR.
Continue CPR. Okay, until we get there, right? But between having them continue and us getting there, what should you be doing?
Coaching them through it.
Coaching them through it, right? How can you coach them through it?
Well, if they, I actually took a call last night where they had the person performing CPR had me on speaker, and they were doing chest compressions. They started to get tired. I just kept encouraging them to keep going.
Yeah.
Keep doing chest compressions. You're doing a good job.
Yeah, exactly. Positive encouragement, coaching. You're doing a great job. What you're doing is helping. Keep going. But I would add in there, just have them count out loud, because they could be compressing at 200 a minute. They could be compressing at 20 a minute. You really don't know. Even if they say, I know CPR, a lot of trained healthcare providers say they know CPR, but they still don't do it well. We see this in our own data. We track the rates of EMS, fire, and law enforcement officers who do chest compressions. We see them compressing at 160 a minute. We see them compressing at 80 a minute. The best way to track that rate, one, is to have them count out loud, but two, how are you timing? How are you keeping track of that rate? Like, how do you know if they're compressing at 100 to 120 a minute? You really don't unless you use a metronome, right? So, your system has a metronome on it that you can play as they're counting out loud. And having them count out loud achieves something else other than just ensuring that they're at the right rate, but it makes sure that they're actually doing CPR. Because even if you're coaching them and you're saying you're doing a good job, keep going, they could be given 5 compressions and stop. Giving 5 compressions and stop, right? So by having them count out loud, when you hear them stop counting, you're like, hey, keep going, I need you to keep doing CPR.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so recommendations. There are a lot of people smarter than me who come up with performance metrics. So there are goals that they put out by the AHA and other organizations that you should aim for with your telephone CPR instructions. One of them is the percentage of total cases correctly identified by telecommunicators. Now, I am more concerned that I'm less concerned with over triage. What do I mean by that? It means providing CPR instructions on someone who doesn't need it. I am much more concerned with under triage, meaning not providing CPR instructions on someone who does need it. Worst case scenario, if you provide CPR instructions on someone who doesn't need it, they have a sore chest. Very rarely does it cause harm. And they've studied this. Seattle did a study where they looked at patients who received telephone CPR instructions and come to find out was not in a cardiac arrest. So they did not correctly identify a cardiac arrest. And the chances, the harm that came to patients was point something percent. All right. So one of it was, and when we say harm, we're talking a broken rib. My chest hurts. I've got a sore chest from them pushing on my chest. One person got a broken hip. How do you think they got a broken hip?
Improper placement.
It wasn't improper hand placement.
Oh, that's an odd one.
That's an odd one, right? Pulling them off of the bed or the couch. So they were on a bed or couch, and the dispatcher said, "Hey, you got to get them in the floor. If they're on a sheet, grab the sheet, pull them in the floor." So it's like better a broken hip than death, right? Better anything than death. So another recommendation is, and this is a similar. This is ones that you correctly identify. This is percentage of total, okay, that you correctly identify. And this is percentage of recognizable, meaning we track all this data. So we listen to the tapes, we put it into a national database, and there are exclusions, stuff that nobody could have recognized as a cardiac arrest, so we exclude those cases, and there's a separate group for that. I'm going to skip that one. So time, there are also time standards and time metrics. Again, this is the most time critical situation that any patient can encounter, cardiac arrest. And we talked about, the chance of surviving going down by each minute. And from my perspective, when we're looking at the times and we're looking at the data, we're talking seconds. If we can save a second processing the call and dropping the tones, if we could save a second recognizing it, if we could save a few seconds with getting hands on the chest, before you know it, those seconds add up. And if we save 10 seconds here, 10 seconds there, 20 seconds here, we're talking minutes. And when we're talking minutes, we're talking an increase in 10, 20% survival, okay? So every second matters. So you have to be relentless in your efforts to identify that the person's in cardiac arrest, get first responders on the way, and get hands on the chest and get them pushing on the chest. You have to be relentless because every second counts. Every second counts. So this is the recommendation, and they have these benchmarks. This is for recognition, so time interval between 911 call and recognition. And they have a pretty wide benchmark here, 60 to 120 seconds. And obviously, when you're measuring, when you're tracking this data, you might start off by being 2 minute seconds or 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and your goal is to meet this benchmark. All right, and we can say, all right, we're at 120 seconds of median time between 911 call and out of hospital recognition, but this is our goal. So this is what we're aiming for, 60 seconds. 60 seconds would be a high performing agency. 120 seconds would be just meeting the benchmark. And then the median time interval between 911 call and first directed compression. So this is from the time you get the call to the time that you provide the first telecommunicator instructed compression. And the benchmark here is 120 to 180 seconds. So we're talking within 3 minutes from you getting that call to you getting hands on the chest, which doesn't seem unreasonable, but it's actually not the easiest benchmark to meet. All right, we're not going to practice CPR skills here. You all have your CPR card. All right, so the first stage of telephone CPR is identifying that it is in fact a cardiac arrest. And the best way to identify out of hospital cardiac arrest is by assuming that every call will be a cardiac arrest. How do we do that? 911, what's your emergency? They give you a spiel, right? Are they conscious? Are they breathing normally? Okay, always ask those two questions. Now, if they're conscious, if they're awake and alert, you don't have to ask the breathing normally question. Have they talked to you all about no-go yet? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if they're conscious, if the caller says, yes, they're awake and they're conscious, come in. Yeah.
Oh, I forgot all about my.
You got food?
Whoops.
Huh?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's fine.
You want to turn around so you can say hi?
As long as you bring me some food. I'm just kidding.
You want some food?
No, go ahead. All right, so where were we at? Identifying. So yes, the first question you ask is, are they conscious? All right. If they're conscious, they're probably not in cardiac arrest. Generally, if they're in cardiac arrest, they're unconscious. Now, that is also a question that can trigger the resources that you send on that call. From my perspective, I'm sure you all have these different departments saying, we want to go on this call, but not this call, and this department wants to go on this call. Any patient who's unconscious should basically be a multi-tone and get every resource, because that could be a cardiac arrest, even if you have not gotten to the breathing part of the protocol or no-go. It's going to take time to determine the breathing status, and that is precious time that a first responder could be on their way to that call. And from my perspective, from an EMS perspective and an administrative perspective, I care, but I am less concerned about how long it takes an ambulance to get there than I am how long it takes to get someone there. It could be a police officer, it could be a firefighter, someone who knows how to do CPR and has an AED. The response time of that person is more important and more critical than the response time of the ambulance. I'll let you get this out, get your food out, but we're going to watch this really cool video of what a cardiac arrest looks like. Have you worked in EMS? Fire, anything? You haven't? Never? Why don't you tell me what you think a cardiac arrest looks like? Just describe it to me.
Unconscious, not breathing, on the ground. That's what comes to mind.
Not breathing, not moving.
Right.
They look dead. That's what a dead person looks like, right? Like, they're not breathing, they're not responding. This is what it really looks like, and hopefully that speaker works. Nope, I'm no longer connected. Let me try to connect.
That must have been what that sound was. I don't know what it is. Hot water. What is it?
Sprite.
I don't even know why the camera was on. I never read it. I wasn't going to do it.
Make free Sprite.
It's not gonna make you do
Hopefully it's not dead, because
it. That must have been that sound we heard. I heard it earlier. I don't know if it was
that's
disconnected.
it.
I thought somebody was connected to it.
That's fine. Let me connect it to my computer, see if I can get it to turn on. Because I can't get the sound to play. There we go. I can't get the sound to play through the TV. Da, da, da. All right. Let's try this now. There we go. Whoops. All right, here we go. So a cardiac arrest doesn't look like what you think it looks like. And here's what it actually looks like. So, the first thing that someone thinks when an athlete suddenly collapses is generally not a cardiac arrest, which is problematic. If you look at Damar Hamlin, he survived because they realized that even young people, young healthy people who suddenly collapse during exertion, can have a cardiac arrest. It can be a cardiac arrest, and that should be the first thing that you assume when a young person collapses. But what you noticed in this case was the chest was moving. In other cardiac arrest cases, the arms can move, okay, early on in a cardiac arrest, and that is the brainstem's response, last-ditch effort of trying to circulate blood. So the brain is almost having abnormal electrical activity, almost like a seizure, and you can see this agonal, deep, irregular breathing pattern. And we see this too if we witness someone go into cardiac arrest, and sometimes when we're doing CPR, we will be doing CPR and the arms will start moving. And they'll take this deep gasping breath that's not a normal breath. And then we'll stop CPR because we're like, oh, their heart must be beating. And then what happens? They quit moving, all right? So someone can be in cardiac arrest and need CPR. They're still unconscious, but they can have abnormal breathing and some movement. All right, so here's another example, a better example, one of my favorites of abnormal or agonal breathing. And this is going to be one of the more difficult calls that you take because if you answer that phone, you say, are they conscious? They say no. And you say, are they breathing? If you say, are they breathing? They might say yes, because they're taking these agonal breaths. They're still in cardiac arrest. That's why you say, are they breathing normally? So watch this.
Check pulse. If no pulse, give CPR.
So that's a good example of agonal breathing. I think this person actually survived. This was a drowning, but I think this person survived. And this is a cardiac arrest. The good thing about the protocol and following the algorithm and stuff like that is there's a clause in there, I'm pretty sure, that says if there's ever any uncertainty, begin CPR instructions. So you can subvert the entire protocol and go straight to CPR. So if you ask, don't ask if they're breathing, ask if they're breathing normally. They may describe this differently, like it's really slow, they're taking these deep breaths. Sometimes you'll hear in the background the gasping for air in someone who's unconscious. You still need to provide CPR instructions on those patients. And I'll just tell you, if we hear a dispatcher or a telecommunicator say they're taking agonal breaths, In my mind, I'm like, this is someone that can live. This is a patient. They caught it early. And if the dispatcher starts pre-arrivals and we get there, this could be one we just shock once and we get a pulse back. So this is a favorable sign if they are breathing agonally, but you still must start CPR.
Pulse give CPR.
So this is another example. This was actually, I'm pretty sure this video was a helicopter EMS company. I think it was in a different country, but a helicopter EMS company, organization or company, and the pilot suffered a cardiac arrest at the station. Watch his arm right there. Now his CPR is not that great, but that's something we can talk about later. Yeah. So these weird posture and movements. Sometimes they'll do that and they'll make these snoring sounds that you can hear over the phone in the background. And when I'm listening to these calls, I've heard it in the background. I've heard that agonal breathing. I heard that snoring. I've also heard the dispatcher saying, well, I need you to check their breathing. Are they breathing normally? They're like, yeah, it sounds like they're breathing normally. And then you can hear it. They're not breathing normally. And I'm just like, tell them to do CPR. Just do CPR. All right. Why don't we take like a 10-minute break? Because I've been talking for a while and I could use a bathroom break. I can stop this.